Hello. Hey, hi everyone. Nice to see you there, despite this COVID times. I was planning to show you a presentation, but we're having some technical issues. But since it was mainly about introducing the people that are going to take part in this panel and our organization that is acting as a chair, I think I can do it from memory, so no problem with this. I'm Alexandre Brutelle. I'm an investigative journalist and co-founder at EIF, which stands for Environmental Investigative Forum. So we are a French-registered NGO that is acting as a global network to connect scientists and journalists around environmental investigations. We started doing this a year ago, so we're kind of a baby NGO still, and still discovering many things about this setting. But we've been invited by the CMMA to organize this talk on neo-colonialism, migration, and climate change, of course. Since we're the Environmental Investigative Forum, that's something to keep in mind. I wanted to start with giving you an example of what we do with the organization and why we were asked to come here. So a recent project that we've been building on, first we only work on a cross-border level. So we always have a journalist from the West working with a journalist from the East, a journalist from the North working with a journalist from the Global South in order to develop some cross-border investigative project. It's really important for us to have someone from each region working in a cooperative way on a similar topic. And I think the most representative project that we've led recently is a story that we're going to publish in a couple of days about illegal gas extractivism in the south of Tunisia. We worked on this topic because it was suspected before that a French company called Perenco was extracting unconventional gas illegally in the south of the country, but there was still an ongoing debate about is it actually what they are doing or not, and our investigation that is going to be published in Tunisia for Intifada and in French for Mediapart try to break into this debate with scientific evidence in order to answer this question. So for this project, we had a journalist from Tunisia, a journalist from France, myself, and some experts working in order to assess this. So here's what we do with the NGO. You can see, I think, easily the link with neo-colonialism and the way we hope to tackle this by merging journalists that belong to the same region to tackle an issue, because it's not only the team that is cross-border, it's the nature of the topic. You see the French company going in the Global South to extract unconventional gas when it's illegal. You can easily see the connection with neo-colonialism, with the aspect of natural resource sovereignty, for example, in the country, and with migration, because when they go in the south of Tunisia in order to do this extraction, they are disturbing not on the local habitat for everyone. So it goes from the aquifers there to the environmental assets that are located on the site where they extract, but also for the local populations there. And most often, these local populations are being forced to flee in order to find a job when their agricultural activity has been disturbed and such things. So that's it about us and what we do. And we're really happy to be there to be chairing this session. Kristof, my colleague from Hungary, is going to be the moderator for this talk. And as speakers, we're going to have Gideon Sparong, who's the director and co-founder of iWatch Africa. He's also a network member at EIF. And Ugochi Oluigbo, who's an African environmental journalist from Nigeria. And finally, this civil and environmental engineer, Noor, that kindly accepted to join us. We were supposed to have Amal Mekki, a partner and journalist from Tunisia, but due to prolonged COVID symptoms, she couldn't make it, unfortunately, today. So, leaving the floor to you, and hopefully to our two other guests that we should meet online on Zoom, I hope.
For this introduction. Welcome everyone online and offline. I'm Kristof Horvath. I will be your moderator at this panel talk. Let me start with saying a little bit about the structure. We'll have Ugochi present her talk, then Gideon, and finally Noor with questions and answers in between the presentations. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ugochi, who is a fellow of the Climate Change Media Partnership, a news anchor and environmental journalist with a decade of experience in reporting on environmental issues in Nigeria and globally. She's the creator of Green Angle, an award-winning environmental TV show on Nigerian TV, and has also hosted Local Warming, a BBC World Series Services environmental radio program. Currently, she's a freelance journalist and the co-host of Joliba, a multi-language African radio show on Radio X Basel. Her presentation will cover migration caused by climate change. The floor is yours. Okay. As Ugochi is at the moment unavailable, I'm gonna switch to Gideon. I'm going to make a short introduction of Gideon as well. He's a policy analyst and media practitioner with a decade of experience in policy data and investigative journalism. He's a co-founder of iWatch Africa and currently the head of policy and news. He's also the policy leader fellow at the European University Institute, School of Transnational Governance in Florence, Italy, and an open internet for democracy leader at the National Democratic Institute in Washington, D.C. He's going to give us a presentation on the relation between climate change financing and neo-colonialism. The floor is yours, Gideon.
Hello, good to see you all. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Are you going to share my presentation slides, or do I have to share it from here?
Yes, go ahead, share your presentation.
I am unable to share it because the host has disabled the function. Anyways, I can still go ahead if I can't share the presentation directly from here. So my topic mainly of the presentation will focus on climate financing and its connection to neo-colonialism and also the aspect of migration. It is very important to put this particular discussion into proper perspective. Historically, when we talk about CO2 emissions, okay, I think I can share my presentation now, so just a second.
Perfect, we see you.
Yeah, so historically, when we talk about climate change financing, you see from the graph on your screen that the United States has contributed the largest when it comes to CO2 emissions, closely, and that is 25% historically, closely followed by the EU, which has contributed 22%. We have China in the mix. When you look down there, you realize that Africa has contributed less than 5% historically when we talk about CO2 emissions. But when you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you realize that with the Climate Vulnerability Index, the region which is most vulnerable actually has to do with Africa and also parts of Southern America. And for Africa, it's mainly largely because farmers, predominantly farming is the major profession across the continent, and to a large extent, farmers depend directly on the climate for their yield. So any significant changes in climate actually affects the farmers So let's put this in perspective. So what are the key questions I would want to look at? What is the 100 billion commitments as part of the Paris Agreement? How is the current climate finance and mechanism influencing neo-colonialism? And what will be the impact if nothing happens next month at COP26 in Glasgow? Now, the graph we can all see on our screen is a debt to GDP share in Africa, and it mainly highlights some of the major economies around the continent. We realize that this is a projection by Bloomberg that most of the economies in Africa have over 50% of their debts to GDP ratio. But what is interesting with this particular graph is that when you look at the total revenue many African countries are expected to receive, for example, Nigeria will be spending close to 40% of its total revenue on simply debt financing. In Ghana will be spending close to 50% of its total revenue. This is very, very significant because then it means that there is very little fiscal room for countries to actually invest in other areas such as education, such as hospitals, etc., because of the fiscal rigidity and also compounded by COVID-19. So far, IMF projected as at close of last year that 54% of low-income countries are debt distressed. But why is debt really significant problem when we talk about neo-colonialism and its impacts on migration? So this is what I would want us to take a key focus on. When the Paris Agreement was formed some years ago, a major part of the financing instrument was the 100 billion commitment. And these are monies developed countries agreed to give to developing countries as a historical payback to support their climate initiatives in recognition that they have contributed enormously to the climate crisis we are facing. But then what have we witnessed over the period? So since the 100 billion commitment was formed as part of the climate agreement, we realized that 80% of the funding is in the form of loans and non-grant instruments, whereas only 20% are in the form of concessionary loans. Now, this is a problem. Why is it a problem? It is a significant problem, and it is a way of using climate financing to influence economic outcomes, because already many developing countries are financially distressed. So, whereas to give funding for climate initiatives become also an instrument to further tie developing countries into debt, then that becomes a major problem, and that becomes a major hurdle for a lot of developing countries. This is what Oxfam in their 2020 reports said about climate financing as it is today. Finance that should be helping countries respond to climate change should not be harming them by contributing to rising and in many circumstances unsustainable debt levels. So that is the major problem when it comes to how climate financing is currently arranged and the threats that it could become a neo-colonialism instrument to actually control the economic outcomes in developing countries. What happens when nothing is done? The first significant problem we are all going to face, which Europe is facing that at some levels, forced migration. So we witness our brothers within Northern Africa, and mostly the migration even comes from Sub-Saharan Africa, go through the deserts and go through the Mediterranean. We simply need to get to Europe. And most of these guys are farmers who have lost their livelihoods, also because of the impact of climate change. We also see migration within the continent of Africa, where you see a lot of people move from the northern parts, where the land is gradually becoming very, very dry and not usable for growing crops, move downstream to make a living. So there is a significant impact on migration. Then also, we are looking at a financial inclusion. Actually, various economic models are predicting that if nothing is done about the debt unsustainability levels in developing countries, there will probably be a financial inclusion before the close of the decade. Rising sea levels, flooding, food insecurity, and further constraints in investing in several other areas of the economy. What is the way forward? I'll be bringing my presentation to a close pretty shortly. So, one, a key part of the agreement at COP 2016 should incorporate climate finance, and it should be debt for climate swap, where a huge part of the debts developing countries owe to developed countries can be converted into investments into climate-related initiatives. Because, at the end of the day, developed countries have already agreed to giving 100 billion to developing countries as part of their climate contribution. Then we must also have an increase in concessionary and grant-based support to a minimum of 50%. The current level of 20% is unsustainable, and it's only going to inflate and deepen the debt burden facing low-income countries. Then a very significant point, as at the close of 2020, developing countries or low-income countries owed developed countries close to 900 billion, and close to 400 billion of this debt was public debt. In essence, what this means is that developing countries can really do something about the debt situation because these are public debts, and it is quite easy to do something about that. So that is basically my brief presentation for the day, and I am ready for questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gideon, for your presentation. I would like to ask the audience or my fellow panelists, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Raise your hands and I can... Lady in blue.
There's no one to give you a microphone, but I don't mind doing it.
Okay, I'm Inge Altemeyer, North German Television. My big question is, if you speak about debts, the question is how the money trickles down. As we have the areas with high biodiversity, they are inhabited by indigenous people. 90% of the areas which are still in a good shape are inhabited by indigenous people, who are only 5% of the population. So if it's neocolonialism or not, how will you make sure that the money reach these people?
Yeah, so a key part of financing when it comes to climate initiatives has to go directly, has to go through for the developing countries, and I'll speak specifically for Africa. It goes through the African Development Bank, and they work with governments. But then the alternative is that they must work with civil society institutions, because then we have a high situation as well, also where monies which are non-concessionary, meaning that countries are going to pay back, are given to governments, and those monies do not end up where it's supposed to end up. But then with the civil society funding model, over the years, there has been significant improvement in trust in terms of monies actually going to where they have to get to. And I think that is a financing model which basically works and is going to work best. The other aspect also is that there has to also always be a consortium of institutions dealing with this particular issues, where you don't necessarily leave the governments to be so
Yeah, I just thought about something, actually about, I'm going to go back there, about a project that we are doing with a Tanzanian journalist called Simon Makina. And we are investigating at the moment mangrove forest loss in a particular part of the country. And it just reminded me something. So it's about a dam that is supposed to be built on a delta. And by building this dam, there's a risk of the mangrove resource reducing and land coverage being degraded by that. And I just remember, because it's backed up by the Tanzanian government, and I just remembered that for them, actually, the term neo-colonialism was being used to contradict the people that were saying this project was environmentally harmful, which is also interesting. So they would say basically, so civil society, the local one in Tanzania, was saying like, you should not build this dam because it's going to impact local population, it's going to impact mangrove forest resource, and the answer of the government was saying, well, international standards, and actually it was on a UNESCO site that they were planning to do this, that these international standards were a form of neo-colonialism in order to keep them away from building this dam. So you can see this rhetoric being used also by local governments to just block, let's say, some civil society opposition. That's something also I wanted to mention. But is there anyone who would like to ask a question to Gideon?
Okay.
Don't fight, huh? Okay, but good news is that Ugochi is actually online, so we can move to our presentation.
Yes, also time is up for the questions. So later on at the end of the conversations, we can still ask questions. But now, I presented Ugochi before. Ugochi, please present us with your migration caused by climate change topic. Thank you, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. Hello everyone. I'll be waiting to see my screen. I can't see anything yet. Am I to share it myself?
Yes, please share your screen.
Okay. One moment, please. It was glad to listen to what you said about the mix-up when government says neo-colonialism is a tool to stop them from developing their projects. I remember I interviewed one governor in Cross River State who had said that. He said he actually told his people, we asked him about cutting down trees. He was trying to build a big highway that would chop across several kilometers into the forest, protected area. And I remember interviewing him, and he told me, and he actually told me, in Morocco, how many trees have you seen in Morocco? That was what he said to me. They're surviving without trees, and he was, in business with people trying to chop down these trees and sell them. So that really, resonated with me when. Sorry, one moment. I'm having trouble with sharing my screen. Okay. Can you see it now?
No, but I think at this stage we can just go freestyle and listen to you because it's been going on freestyle from the start.
Okay.
So, I mean, let's not bother with these technicalities and we will happily listen to you.
Okay. So I started I wish I could share it and show my pictures. This is, I'll talk from my experience. It's called Climate Migrants See No Borders. They see no colonialism. And from my experience, when people try to leave their homes or their villages or their communities that they really cherish, at that point, it means that we only have one option to move. And many times, this picture I'm showing here, it's my hand. My hand is oily. It's from the Niger Delta, where I've seen firsthand the experience abusing your rights, you're destroying our farms, and then there's fight. And then they also accuse them of, killing their cattle. And this is getting, if you've been following the news in Nigeria, they say it's a genocide happening across the middle belt of Nigeria and the south of Nigeria. And it's worsening by the day, because those I've interviewed who are from this tribe, they tell me even climate change has made the cattle to be more adapted to the weather or to life in the south of Nigeria. So we know that things are going to get worse. Migrants and people are going to move from the south to anywhere they can move to. It doesn't matter where, to Europe. It's a global problem. They are going to find their way. They're going to go, no matter how much you tell them that, the ocean is dangerous for them, they can't make that trip. They're going to make that trip because people have to move. They are forced to move, forced migration. And then also, and then we see the takeover of the oceans as well. I've done stories about fishing trawlers that come to the waters across West Africa. If you can see the picture, these are cartons and cartons of fish imported into ocean communities who ordinarily should not be experiencing this. I wish I could show you this. Cartons of fish from ocean communities who should be exporting fish. But it's unusual that they're now being the ones, it's called transshipping. These multi-billion big trawlers come to their waters, and then they take. If you watch the movie Seaspiracy, that would make sense to you. So there's colonialism everywhere, neo-colonialism everywhere, taking over the oceans, and they're so powerful, these people cannot fight them, they cannot challenge them. So sometimes, even in Lagos State, when you go to the ocean communities to buy fish, and you believe you're buying fresh fish from the fishing communities, a lot of times, no, it's not true. These people buy from those who have, gone out to catch the fish. They can't compete with them. They can't fight with them. They are more powerful. And then the government enables them. It's a dangerous business, even as journalists, it's a dangerous business reporting this, trying to analyze what is going on. It's dangerous business. So as I said, it's everywhere. The water, the land, the ocean, the fish, everything is going, to those who are more powerful than the others from rural communities. And I also wrote something to the next slide. It says, neo-colonialism keeps the resource poor richer, and its resource rich poorer as extreme exploitation and consumption continue. There's a lack of political will to tackle environmental and climate crisis. We know all about this. It's a cycle that keeps going on and on, even with the government. We see multi-billion-dollar companies using the government of the people to fight the people in these communities. So it's a huge problem. As it works together, these people work together, they make money out of what they are doing, they're subjugating the people. It's a cycle that has not gone away, and we don't know when it's going to go away. I also showed a picture of me. This is me in a flooded community. This community is close to the Atlantic Ocean. And I wrote, in the future, neo-colonialism will not be spared. I have a story about Lafiaji Ocean Community and Chevron Estates in Lagos. So I've been going to the community called the Beachside Community. There are lots of them. Alpha Beach, and then Lafiaji Community. These communities have over the years experienced sea level rise. And interestingly, there are developments that has happened just close. It was really far from the ocean many years ago. But now, the ocean is taking over everything. So slum communities, last time I was there, every year I go there to report on the ocean search, I see a difference. The houses I saw last year, by the time I go the next time, they are no longer there. This is real time. This is what I'm seeing live. And then I went there last year, after 2 years, when I went back, many of the homes are gone. And what the people told me is that there's a big development going on. It's called the Chevron Estates development. It's a big development happening there. And they're telling me that they don't know what else to do. At some point, they're going to have to run into Chevron, and it's a fossil fuel big company. They have a big estate that is totally empty. They are renting them out, people are buying them, and people are living there, but a lot of them are really empty homes. So I'm telling you that at some point, it's getting out of hand. People are going to fight back. I know there's a rush to go to Mars, to discover other planets where people can move to. But why are you doing this? Why not protect, what we have already? Protect the planet that we have. Why need to spend so much money to do this? Does it make any sense? So what I'm trying to say is, at some point, people are going to fight back. I don't know. What we saw the last time I was there eager to see by in July if these people are going to move to these estates by force, because it is a huge problem. Yeah, these are not slum dwellers. These are even local people who are telling me at some point we have to be forced to move into this colonialism and migration. I spoke to my neighbor recently. She had complained that the bureaucracy of France was pissing her off. She's Spanish, and she told me she had registered for a lot of opportunities, but she discovered that priority was given to her, according to her, to people from Algeria, to people from Morocco, and she says, I'm European. I should be having more rights than these people. And I said, I understand you. I understand what you're saying, but do you realize, am I taking too much time? Sorry, I'll be done briefly. So I said, do you realize that some of these people, were colonized? Sorry, one moment, my kids are, sorry. Do you realize that these people were also colonized and they paid their dues? They suffered. And she told me, that was many years ago. They should forget about what happened. And I said, no, it's impossible. You can't really say that. And she was really angry. She said, I have more rights. I don't care what happened in the 1900s. I don't care. I am here now. This is European. I'm European. And I said, oh my God. I tried to explain to her. And she said, no. Very soon we're going to vote. We're going to ask France to leave the EU because this is not fair. I'm paying taxes and then they're bringing more immigrants. I said, there is a history here. Have you thought about this history? Have you thought about what these people went through? And she said she doesn't care. And I realized that, misinformation, the media paints the picture of us as immigrants. I'm an immigrant. I live in France right now. As people who, actually, what she told me? I like you because you're intelligent, you are educated. And I felt really bad about that. And over the years, I told her we really have to talk over and over and over and understand this issue, because I felt she wasn't understanding any history. She didn't care about what happened in the past. She said all she knows that is in the past. This is the present. We're going to vote and we're going to stop Oluigbo from coming to the country. And guess what? She's also migrated. She left Spain to come to France for a better life. And she's also looking forward to going even to Switzerland. She hopes to be in Switzerland. And then I said, what makes me different from you? Or what makes those immigrants different from you? Is it because of their skin color? What makes them different from you? You move for a better life. They have the right to move for a better life. So that's why I said there's a role the media plays. Let's speak up and change the narrative for a fair and just inclusive transition. As we are attending the COP, let's speak up for the communities as journalists. Let's not, put our bias before us and think that if you're not my color, if you cannot speak the language, you're not the same religion, we're not the same. So, let's speak up for communities. Let's leave no one behind in all of this. And they keep saying, oh, let's transit to renewables and let's go to. And I ask them, I understand what you're saying. It's good to be green, but how about the communities where these resources are being mined? Children are doing the mining. Women are doing the mining. There's pollution, and then you come out and greenwash and say, oh, we're transiting to renewables. My car is green. My home is green. What happened to where the communities, where these things are coming from? So I think for all of us here who are journalists, who are reporters, whatever we're doing, to try to change the narrative. And I wrote, with the cycle continue, will COP26 be an impressive showcase of lessons from COVID in response to climate change. I really wish that it happens like that. I really wish that the way we tackle climate change, the way the world came together to provide everything, we can get vaccines to rural areas, and that's the same way we would handle this. I used to call myself a journalist with the most to lose because climate change is in my face. But I've thought about it, even in Germany. Look at what happened with the floods. We're all journalists with the most to lose. We're all, yes, some countries have really built and they're ready to adapt to this, but all of us are threatened at the way it is. So it's all our responsibilities to speak up. When negotiations were stopped by big and powerful polluters who have done this for years and years, they're always there at the conferences. They're there to stall the resolutions. They're there to play politics and make it difficult. Will it be business as usual? I think that's my last slide, and then who I am. My name is Ugochi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ugochi. Thank you. This reminded me of this story, how the world is very interconnected, but we don't see sometimes the connection. I read this backstory about how the migrant crisis of 2015 was actually caused by droughts in the Middle East, and so the rural population had to move in Syria in the cities, and as the cities were growing and growing, the infrastructure couldn't just take them, and it wasn't possible for them to live even in their own country in the cities, so they started to migrate, but then the Western media not necessarily talks about it enough. So I agree with you, totally journalism can help and should help, so we can focus on that. Now I will take questions from the audience. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, my question is, you know, Shell has been several times prosecuted by the court in the Netherlands to pay for the cleaning up of the Niger Delta. And Shell has been recently prosecuted in a court case by the people of the Netherlands against them, that they have to stop drilling because they are a long time knowing about climate change. Do you think that could be a solution? And is it very important that we journalists also go down, and it's always very boring to make a report on court cases, but do you believe that is a chance for a change, court cases, which some NGOs in Europe, Friends of the Earth, I think it's win?
Yes, I think when you go for the people's pockets, when you go for the big companies, they don't like to pay for anything. When you go for their profits, I think they don't like that. So I think it's important for us to report that they should pay for this. And when they remember what it cost them, they're going to be careful. They're going to change their pipes. You know, sometimes you know that we hear that 40 years, 50 years, it's the same pipes. They don't change them. They don't work on them. They don't, you know, repair these things. So they're going to be more careful. You know, the same way they operate in other countries. That should be, the same standards should be happening in smaller communities in the Niger Delta. So if we keep reporting about paying and reparations and, you know, cleaning up, I think they're going to sit up and do the right thing. Yes, there is corruption in governance in Nigeria. Yes, there is corruption. And then when you do that, they're also going to sit up and tell the government, hey, look at what we're paying for this. We need to sit up and, you know, we need to sign better deals, and we need to do things differently. So I think we need to report on finance as a means of, you know, regulating what is happening in the industry.
If I can just react quickly on that, I just remembered for the story we did with Amal Mekki, the Tunisian journalist I was telling you about before. We realized that this company, Perenco, was having this construction extractive site, directly within the limits of a national park called the Jebil National Park. So when we found this house, we were like, this must be illegal in some way, you know. So we talked with an expert, we found the text law saying, okay, no extractive activity can happen within the limits of a national park in Tunisia. And then we're like, okay, what is the penalty for infringing this law? How much do you think it is in terms of fine?
How much?
$4,000.
Oh my.
So not only fines can work, but you need strong legal framework. It's not my place. I'm a journalist. I'm not a policymaker. Being a journalist, if I would be a policymaker, I would be seen as a dictator probably, because I wouldn't fine 4,000 euros.
Yeah, that's true.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay, thank you again, Ugochi, for your presence.
Thank you for having me.
We come back to you. Now it is time for... So, our third guest today is Noor Nasser Adin. Is of Palestinian origin, born and raised in Kuwait. At the moment, she is finishing her bachelor studies in civil and environmental engineering at the Technical University of Harburg. She is engaged at the intersections of art and science and how to incorporate both sectors into an environmental context to raise awareness. She has assisted to create the Art Room project at the university, building a space where technicalities become a part of art. Currently, she's helping students at the Autonomous Building Institute and working in projects with a focus on sustainability. Noor, what do you think, what is, from a civil and from an engineering point of view, is there any solutions to what Ugochi and Gideon has mentioned before us?
Is this working? Yeah. Hey, everyone. So as an engineer, still not have been a part of a lot of projects still, but as in our university, for instance, we concentrate a lot on climate change and how can we be a part of changing it without taking the humanitarian aspect of it. For instance, Mrs. Ugochi,
Ugochi.
have discussed something in terms of, for instance, here in Germany they talk a lot about electrical cars and how to transmit to renewable energies, although they're forgetting the aspect of how exploitative that might be to other communities. For instance, with building these electrical power engines, you have to extract a lot of lithium from Atacama Desert in Chile, for instance, and a lot of inhabitants and original populations from Chile, for instance, are living there, and they're being migrated forcibly for this sort of acts. And as an engineer, we're not aware of that. So I think these communities are extremely important to make us also aware of what are we a part of in general. And I think in Germany there are a lot of developments happening since we're a progressive country, and the Industrial Revolution have caused a lot of mess during the decades. And I think this acceleration doesn't have to happen all over the world at the same time, because each resource is different and each continent needs its own things. So yes, on an aspect, I think we should shed lights and be more communicative in what we're doing actually, and be more aware of it in that sense.
Okay, so you think that as an engineer or engineers, you should take a different angle on creating new technologies and taking into aspect this forced migration happening with the resources just for the extraction of resources, and that is a possibility with new technology to stop this?
Yes, and I think academia should intersect a lot with journalism, for instance, that is very separative, because in terms of technology you only concentrate on how to make something better without knowing that you're causing something different in that sense. So yes, a lot of, we should be more transparent in the acts.
Also, there should be more connection with journalists. First, there should be more connections between journalists coming from different regions. That's obvious. I mean, we all agree on this. Like, we are tired of the BBC reporter going to Iraq and then coming back with his report, not mentioning his source, not mentioning who helped him, and not mentioning the local population, first of all. But then we need also more transversal communication between different sectors, including science. And the idea with EIF for us was, we only invited people that are journalists in this panel, but we also have a lot of experts, remote sensing experts that are working on with satellite imagery, for example. And by using technologies such as this, you can really improve the investigative reports you do on a more like science-based level, which is something else that coming back with a report that actually doesn't have any legal ground or scientific ground to prove what's going on the side, on the field.
Gideon, are you here with us? Is Gideon still with us?
Do we still have the people on Zoom with us?
Yes, Gideon, you heard Ugochi's. You heard Ugochi's presentation. Would you like to reflect on what she said?
Yeah, I think mainly also in terms of practically, we should also be careful. For instance, in Europe and also in the global north in general, we should be careful that as part of the transition into climate, into carbon end up polluting other parts of the world, because then what happens is that you simply transfer the problem to another region, but at the same time without necessarily solving the problem. So my last report I did, which had to do with shipment of queen appliances to parts of Africa and the global south in general, from Europe, then also in the United States, speaks largely to that, where we should avoid the mistake of shifting the burden to other parts of the region, because that in itself is not solving the problem.
It just again made me think about something like, for example, in France, they banned unconventional gas and hydraulic fracturation. So everyone was pretty proud about this. But what they didn't say is that the next year they made a deal with the government of Algeria in order to finance them to explore unconventional resource. So it's totally shifting the problem as well, as Gideon said.
I was wondering, sorry, for one moment, can I just show?
Of course.
Slide? Can I show the two pictures I put in there? So I'll give a sense of what it's like when you put your water hand in, just at the top of the water, and you see oil. Sorry, it will take 2 minutes. So this was my first slide. This is me. You just touch it, and that's what you get out. Just on the surface. You don't need to dig deeper. This is what you see. This is how these people live. And you're able to cut open a fish or a shrimp, and what do you find in it? It's oil. So just to give you a sense of how bad the problem is in the Niger Delta, and this is me. This is how flooding can get. This is me reporting on the floods there. And this is how high it was, and it goes higher and higher and higher. So the sea is rising, and it's rising, so fast. Thank you. Okay, sorry, and that's the fish, the cartons. This is actually in Ghana. This is in Jamestown. I saw this in Ghana. I see it in Lagos as well. Cartons of fish imported into an ocean community.
Thank you. I would like to ask the audience if they have any questions, comments. If not, then probably can move on to a closing remark from someone has a question. Great.
My name is Malik. I'm coming from Ghana. And she made mention of Jamestown and the flood that is going on in Africa. Do she think this problem is caused by the people themselves? Because if you throw rubbish in the gutters, definitely when it rains, it's going to overflow. I don't see anything. I think the people themselves must do something about this, not I don't know how to say, the decolonization or something like that sort. We have to keep our environment clean, because if you dump rubbish in a gutter where when it rains, it's going to overflow inside the city, inside the town. So I don't see anything wrong with decolonization and what is overflowing, for my ideas, or maybe what I think.
Okay, I think you're mixing things up here. Yeah, you're mixing it up. I'm not talking about the rubbish. I'm talking about these hundreds and thousands of cartons of imported fish, when the community should be the ones, fishing and selling their fish. They are buying fish from big trawlers, from China, from Europe, from everywhere. They have to go buy from them because these people use big fishing nets that they can't. These local fishermen, they don't have that. They don't have those big trawlers. They literally scrape the ocean floor of everything, even to the tiniest microorganism. When they use that fishing net, they scrape everything. And then when the local fishermen go there, they don't have any fish to catch. So they end up buying
he said he's talking about the overflooding, but I don't think that has really to do with the community. It all goes back to the climate change.
My idea, I think, if overflooding, the community must also, because of where I came from those kind of places. I'm talking about overflooding, okay, not about the fishing, but I'm talking about overflooding over here. Because I know what I'm saying. I don't see anything wrong with decolonization and overflooding. Okay, overflooding is the cost of the people. I think maybe I don't understand your point, but I'm talking about overflooding over here because I've seen people choking gutters, and the government always talk about this problem. And if we keep on repeating the same problem, we always have overflooding. That is my side of my point. Maybe I don't understand the topic very well.
Okay, these are two different things we are talking about, and I'll address the issue of pollution and illegal disposing of refuse. So if that's what you're talking about, yes, there's a problem. We need to educate the people further and tell them when you throw plastic into the ocean, it's not going anywhere. It's going to come back. It's coming back right at you. You know, so if that's what you're talking about, yes, there's a problem with education. There's a problem of waste management in many communities in Africa. I mean, in Lagos as well is a problem. And then we see that, you know, we have, I got tired of covering recycling companies or recycling initiatives because I discovered that Coca-Cola is sponsoring them. You know, you find Coca-Cola sponsoring a recycling project, and then it's nonsense as far as I'm concerned. So how do you sponsor the problem that you're creating and you can't find a solution to your problem? And then we can't recycle about 5 or 10% of what the waste that we produce. It doesn't make any sense. And then they also say, oh, we're giving back to those who have brought plastic to us. We give them back plastic, give them back bottles of Coke and bottles of drink. It's stupid. So if that's what you're talking about, yes, there's a huge problem of pollution, and the communities must work together to address this, especially the government as well, to ensure that waste is managed properly. And the most important thing is to reduce how much waste we produce. That's the most important thing.
Thank you, Ugochi. Alex, would you like to give closing remarks?
Yeah, of course. There's a question here. Yeah.
Good evening. So my question goes to Noor. Nice name, Light. So you're talking, you're gonna be engineer. That's good news. And you know that you pointed to the electrical mobility in Germany, or probably in Europe. This is European policy. And you also mentioned about the people could be misused for labor or whatever to extract lithium or critical materials or critical minerals, we could call it. This is what I'm talking about is the issue that I am concentrating is terrorism. So a lot of terrorists in Afghanistan now, they hold the country, and most of these critical minerals are in Afghanistan, and they are under control of the ISIS-K, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, and also the Taliban. These guys are gonna extract this and sell them in the international market, mostly in the Silicon Valley, and to get money and to support terrorism and export terrorism and radicalization. How could you help in your field to tell these, engineers or whatever to be careful about this as well? Thank you.
I think this is a very heroic thing to be done. It's not only from one sector to be held, only from engineers, I would imagine, but it's more of community awareness that all of us have to develop to some extent, that we know what we're involved with. And into this particular thing, For instance, I think in Afghanistan they're supported a lot from external sectors, like from the US, and I don't want to now go into too much into politics, but it's a very powerful topic because as people, I think we could stop it with a lot of initiative, our own initiatives, and maybe petitions and raising awareness to this sort of topics. And maybe some engineers, for instance, in Afghanistan do that because they are put in a situation where they need the money. And the only thing is to be done is that, unfortunately. So the state itself is forcing them to do that. And I think it's a whole of systematic issue in general, and the problem lies in the system where we find ourselves in general. So I think a whole radical change should be done. I don't know how yet, but yes, maybe start with raising conscious community awareness in general, and decentralize a lot of things, not make it global. Yes. So.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you for the question. Our time is running out, so I would ask Alex.
Thank you for this question. This made me think of something else that I do with an organization called CIFAR, and with CIFAR, it's called the Civil Initiative for Asset Recovery, and we train and mentor journalists to investigate stolen assets, which is a really broad topic. And we are running a program now in West Africa with some partners, Senozo, maybe some of you know Senozo, the investigative journalism organization based in Burkina. And while we were thinking of some environmental topics, we saw what you described, so this question of natural resource exploitation basically being handled by terrorist group in the Sahel region as well. So I'm unfortunately not bringing you a solution on this, just another problem. But yeah, it was a really good point you made. For the rest of this, we are running out of time. I'm really happy we were able to have this moment and to discuss all this despite technical difficulties. Personally, I'm not going to remember the technical difficulties, but more this brief exchange. And thanks to the CMMA team who's doing their best and for inviting us here today. And of course, yeah, if our friends are still here from, Gideon and Ugochi, thank you so much for contributing and for being there on the panel, of course.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.